Section 2.4, Simplifying Fractions. In the last section, we talked about drawing a picture to represent a fraction. So let me do that here. I'm going to draw a square, and I'm going to divide this square as best as I can in half, and I'm going to shade in 1/2 of that. So that represents the fraction 1/2. If I wanted to, I could take that same square and instead of dividing it in half, I could divide it in fourths, which I'm going to do now. And if I shade in the same amount, now I have a different fraction. Now I have the fraction 2/4. But it does show exactly the same amount. I could, if I wanted to, take the same square, and instead of dividing it up into 4 equal pieces, I could divide up into 8 equal pieces. And notice that the same amount is still shaded in, but now I have 4 out of those 8 pieces shaded in. That tells us that 1/2, 2/4, and 4/8 all represent the same amount. And those are known as equivalent fractions. But rather than drawing pictures all the time to show that we have equivalent fractions, there's another way to do it. We know from what we just went through that 1/2 and 2/4 are equal to each other. They show the same amount. Notice that the cross products of these two fractions are equal to each other. And what I mean by that is this. If I were to multiply 1 times 4, I get 4. If I do the same thing, cross multiply the 2 and the 2, I also get 4. If you go through and you can cross multiply and get equivalent products or the same answer, then the two fractions are equal to each other. We can show it also with the 1/2 and the 4/8. So when I know that 1/2 is the same thing as 4/8. Notice again that 1 times 8 gives me 8, and 2 times 4 gives me 8. So I know that those two are equal to each other. I could do the same thing again with the 2/4 and the 4/8. I know that the 2/4 and the 4/8 are equal to each other. 2 times 8 gives me 16, and 4 times 4 gives me 16. So I know that all 3 of these are equivalent to each other. But let's go through and test some other fractions. How about the two fractions 4/10 and 6/15? Are those two fractions showing the same amount? Are they equal to each other? We can check by seeing if their cross products are equal or not. So I'm going to figure out 4 times 15. Now 4 times 15, if I were to multiply that out, I get 60. 10 times 6 also gives me 60. So I know that 4/10 and 6/15 are equal to each other. Let's take a look at another one. How about 2/5 and 3/7? Are 2/5 and 3/7 equal to each other? Let's go through and check. 2 times 7 gives me 14. 5 times 3 gives me 15. So I know that these are not equivalent fractions to each other because their cross products are not equivalent. Here I have 2 more to check and see whether or not they are equivalent to each other. But rather than me just do it, why don't you stop this for a moment, check it yourself, and then turn it back on again and see if you have the same answers. Okay, so hopefully you've been able to go through and check this. I'm going to do the same. So I have, is 2/3 equivalent to 3/5? As I go through and do this, I'm going to multiply 2 times 5. 2 times 5 gives me 10. 3 times 3 gives me 9. So I know that these are not equivalent to each other. As I take a look at the other one, is 2/5 equivalent to 10/25? 2 times 25 gives me 50. 5 times 10 gives me 50. So I know that yes, these two fractions are equivalent to each other. Being able to find equivalent fractions is an important skill in this course. So you can see I have here the fraction 4/6. And 4/6 is equal to 6 something. And I want to figure out what that something is. So I have a question mark there. Well, I can use the idea of cross products having to be equal to find out what that something is. I know that 6 times 6 is equal to 36. So that means 4 times whatever I am looking for here also has to be equal to 36. So 4 times what gives me 36? That answer would be 9. So I know that 4/6 and 6/9 are equivalent fractions. Let's do another one. If I give you 6/8 and I say that 6/8 is equal to something over 40, I can use once again cross products in order to find this out. I'm going to multiply first 6 times 40. 6 times 40 is equal to 240. So I know that 8 times something has to give me 240. So 8 times 30 gives me 240. So I know that 6/8 is the same thing as 30/40. In addition to finding equivalent fractions, another important skill in this section is to be able to simplify fractions. Simplifying fractions means to give an equivalent fraction for another fraction, so that the only common factor of the numerator and denominator is 1. Another name for this is the lowest term fraction. So let's say that you were given the fraction 10/15, and you want to make sure that that fraction is simplified or in lowest terms. As I take a look at both 10 and 15, I know that both 10 and 15 have a common factor of 5 because of the divisibility rule of 5. So one thing I can do is I can divide both the numerator and denominator by 5. Now, when I divide by 5 over 5, what I'm really doing is I'm dividing by 1, because 5/5 is equal to 1. And you know that anytime you divide a number by 1, you get exactly the same thing. So in some ways, I'm thinking about this 5/5 as being equal to 1, but I'm dividing it by 5 over 5. When I do that, 10 divided by 5 gives me 2, 15 divided by 5 gives me 3. So I know that an equivalent fraction for 10/15 is 2/3. Now I could go through and check that by cross multiplying if I wanted to, but because I divided by the same numerator and denominator, in this case 5, I also know that these two are equivalent to each other. So now I have 2/3, and I know 2/3 is in lowest terms because the only common factor of both 2 and 3 is 1. The only factors of 1 or of 2 are 1 and 2, because 1 times 2. The only factors of 3 are 1 times 3. So I know that 2/3 is what is known as lowest terms. Let's put another fraction in lowest terms. Here I have 18/24. So once again, I'm trying to go through and think, what can I divide both 18 and 24 by, or what is a common factor? Once again, now I'm looking at the divisibility rule of 2. And I take a look at that, I know that I can divide both of these numbers by 2 because they're both even. So I'm going to start by going through and dividing both of these by 2. 18 divided by 2 gives me 9. 24 divided by 2 gives me 12. Well, now is 9/12 in lowest terms? Well, one way to find out is to figure out, well, what are the factors of 9? Well, for 9, it's 1 times 9 and 3 times 3. So the factors are 1, 3, and 9. And for 12, the factors are 1 times 12, 2 times 6, and 3 times 4. So if I was going to write all the factors in order, it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12. Is the only common factor 1? Well, no, it isn't, because as I take a look at that, they both have a common factor of 3. So that tells me that now I can go through and I can divide both of these numbers, again, both the numerator and denominator, by 3. 9 divided by 3 gives me 3. 12 divided by 3 gives me 4. Now I have the fraction 3/4. Is 3/4 in lowest terms? Well, yes it is, because once again, the only factors of 3 are 1 times 3. The only factors of 4 are 1, 2, and 4. The greatest common factor, or the only common factor, is 1. So I know that 3/4 is in lowest terms. I want to go through and do the same problem again, but just a little bit differently. So we have 18/24, and we want to put that in lowest terms. Remember the divisibility rules, and we talked about divisibility rules for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, and 10. I want to be able to divide this by the biggest number that I can, so I don't have to do more than one step, so I take a look at 18/24, and knowing the divisibility rule of 6, I know that I could divide both of these by 6/6. If I do that, 18 divided by 6 gives me 3, 24 divided by 6 gives me 4. Now I just did it in one step rather than in two steps. It doesn't matter to me how many steps you take to go through and get it into lowest terms. You just have to make sure that when you are done, that the final answer is in lowest terms. Here's another example, 24/42. I take a look at that and I wonder if that's in lowest terms. I know right away it's not in lowest terms because these are both even numbers. So right away I know that I can divide this by 2/2. So if I want to do it that particular way, I'm going to divide by 2/2. 24 divided by 2 gives me 12. 42 divided by 2 gives me 21. Is 12/21 in lowest terms? Well, once again, now I'm going through my divisibility rules, and I notice that these can both be divided by 3. So I'm going to divide by 3/3. 12 divided by 3 gives me 4. 21 divided by 3 gives me 7. 4/7 is in lowest terms because the only common factor of both 4 and 7 is 1. Once again, if I had wanted to, I could have done this in one step. I have 24/42. And what can I divide both of those by? I had said I could divide them by 2/2, but knowing my divisibility rules again, I could, if I wanted to, divide both of these by 6/6. 24 divided by 4, or 24 divided by 6, I should say, gives me 4. 42 divided by 6 gives me 7. So I could have done it in one step as well. If you are having difficulty figuring out how to put something like 24/42 into lowest terms, let me give you one other process that works, although this process might be a little bit longer. I'm going to take the number 24 and I am going to prime factor that. We talked about that in an earlier session. So if I have 24, I know by doing a factor tree, 2 times 12 gives me 24. I'm going to circle the 2. The 12 I can multiply 3 times 4, so the 3 is a prime number. I'm going to circle it. And the 4 I can factor down to 2 times 2. So the factored form, the prime factored form of 24 is 2 times 2 times 2 times 3. And I could write it that particular way. I can do the same thing with 42. I'm going to take 42 and I am going to prime factor that. So I could say, well, it's 2 times 21. I'm going to circle my 2 because that is a prime number. 21 could be 3 times 7, which are both prime. So 42 could be written as 2 times 3 times 7. Once I do that now, I see that both 24 and 42 have some common factors. So what I'm going to do is I am going to cross out. The 2 and the 2 cancel each other out. 2 halves is equal to 1. I also have a 3 and a 3 in both the top and the bottom. So I cancel those out. Notice on the top I'm left with 2 over 2, or 2 times 2. 2 times 2 is equal to 4. On the bottom, I'm just left with a 7. So 4/7 is in lowest terms. Although this is a little bit longer to do, it is a method that will work all the time if you would like to do it. One last thing to mention in this section. Here's the fraction 8/15. If you're asked to put this in lowest terms, realize that it may already be in lowest terms. So I have 8/15 and I am trying to figure out, is it in lowest terms? Just a reminder, the way to figure out if a fraction is in lowest terms is to figure out what are all the factors of the numerator and the denominator. The factors of 8 are 1 times 8 and 2 times 4. So if I put those factors in order, it would be 1, 2, 4, and 8. The factors of 15 are 1 times 15 and 3 times 5. So if I put those in order, I get 1, 3, 5, and 15. The only common factor between 8 and 15 is 1. If the only common factor between the numerator and the denominator is 1, then it's already in lowest terms and simplified as much as possible. Many people tell me that the part of math they dislike the most is fractions. But being able to work with fractions is very important in this course. Please let me know how I can help you as you work through these concepts.